The point of today's lesson is to inspire you to draw and shade in unpredictable, expressive, and dynamic ways. Now, when you are first learning to shade, I do think it's important that you begin by making thoughtfully observed and highly rendered drawings. But the more competent you become at recognizing and rendering values, the more you can begin to experiment with expression and dynamic mark making. So the first thing you have to understand about shading dynamically is that as long as your drawings follow the laws of perspective and the laws of light logic, you can use almost any form of mark making in your drawings. Today is going to be all about exploring some of the different kinds of dynamic and expressive marks you can use to draw and shade with. And we're going to start this lesson by teaching you how to shade using crosshatching, which is one of the most sought after drawing skills. So let's get started by first teaching you the technique of hatching. Before you learn how to crosshatch, you first need to learn how to hatch. Hatch marks are essentially a series of equally spaced parallel lines. So the first skill you need to learn in order to hatch is drawing a series of lines going in the exact same direction. It's important to remember that there are probably many different ways to hatch and crosshatch, but you'll see me demonstrate the way that I do it and the way that I think that you as a student will have the most success. Most of the time I crosshatch, I use the overhand grip so I can engage the tip of the pencil. You'll also notice that I'm only making marks on the downstroke and then lifting my pencil, placing it back at the top, and drawing on the downstroke once again. To practice making lines that are going the same direction, I would recommend keeping your hand in a fixed location and moving the pencil using your fingers. To practice hatching, I would recommend making the same mark over and over again, one directly on top of the next. As you can see, if all of your lines are going the same direction, the result should appear to be one dark line. This is the first skill you need to master before moving on. When I was first learning to hatch, I filled dozens of pages with hundreds of marks, just like the ones you see here. Once you're comfortable drawing lines that go the same direction, you're going to combine this action with a second motion. Now watch my hand carefully. Holding the pencil in the tripod grip, I'm going to push my fingers outward. With my fingers extended, I'm going to pull the pencil inward back toward my palm. Watch as I demonstrate this once again. Starting with my fingers extended, I'm going to pull the pencil back toward my palm. To help you get a better understanding of this motion, here's what it looks like while viewing the underside of my hand. We are now going to put these two actions together. Here's what the motion should look like. With my hand in a fixed location and my fingers extended, you'll see me pull my fingers inward toward my palm while simultaneously making the motion for hatch marks. To practice this, you can start making hatch marks one on top of another. Once you're confident that your hatch marks are all going the same direction, keep this motion going while pulling your pencil in towards your palm. Once you're comfortable with that, you can try immediately combining both of these actions without beginning by making hatch marks one over another. It's important for you to note that the length of each individual line is not as important as the lines being parallel and evenly spaced. Now there are times when you're hatching that the range of motion you can achieve by using your fingers to pull the pencil inward towards your palm will not be enough. In this case, instead of using your fingers to pull the pencil and space the hatch marks, you can use your entire arm, starting from the shoulder, to pull the pencil in any direction you desire. To practice this, I would once again recommend beginning making hatch marks one on top of another. Once you're comfortable, add in the movement of your arm. Just like when you used your fingers, I would recommend starting with your arm extended and pulling it inward towards your body. Once you've got these techniques down, you can begin practicing changing the value of your hatch marks by varying the speed at which you're pulling the pencil using either your fingers or your arm. The slower you go, the closer the hatch marks will be and the darker the value will appear. As you increase the speed, the further apart the hatch marks will be and the lighter the value will appear. Now the angle of the hatch marks that I've been making is simply derived from the direction my fingers naturally go when I make the hatching motion. At this point, I wouldn't overthink it. Whatever direction comes naturally to you while you make these lines is the direction your hatch lines should go. Once you're comfortable with all of these hatching skills, next you can try your hand at cross-hatching. To cross-hatch, you're going to begin by making a series of hatch marks just like you've seen me demonstrate. Hatching becomes cross-hatching when you place a second set of lines that cross over the initial set of hatch marks. The second set of lines needs to be going in a different direction than the first set. But this second set of lines that cross over the first only need to be going a slightly different direction. One of the most common problems I see when students are learning to crosshatch is that their two sets of crossing hatch marks are too close to being perpendicular or at a right angle to one another. The closer your crossing hatch marks are to being perpendicular, the more they tend to flatten out any illusion of volume. There are no hard rules here, but I would say that the sweet spot in the difference between the angles of the sets of hatch marks is usually between 20 and 40 degrees. And of course, just like hatching, you can crosshatch by pulling the pencil using your fingers or your entire arm. In addition to being able to modify the value by increasing and decreasing the amount of space in between your hatch marks, you can also change the value of your crosshatching simply by using lighter lines with which to hatch. And finally, you can also hatch and crosshatch with the side of your pencil using the overhand grip. This technique produces much thicker and softer hatch marks. Hatching and crosshatching require a good amount of practice to master. But once you've got the fundamentals down, I would encourage you to experiment. See if you can design or discover any unique variations on these crosshatching techniques. Next, you'll learn how to use crosshatching to render shadow patterns on basic volumes. Let's start with the sphere. After drawing the circular shape of the sphere, the line of termination, and the shape of the cast shadow, I can begin applying crosshatching. On my first pass, the angle of the lines is the angle that is most comfortable for me and naturally made when I move my fingers in this way. This first pass simply lays in a light wash of value that separates the lit side of the line of termination from the shadowed side. After reinforcing the contour on the lower left of the sphere, I'll begin using dark hatch marks to fill in the cast shadow. To further darken the cast shadow, you'll see me change the direction of the lines and make a second pass. Just like the tonal shading process that you've seen me demonstrate in the previous lessons, shading with crosshatching is done in layers. Regardless of what kinds of marks you're using to lay in your values, there really is no difference in the steps you would take in the shading process. Here, you can see me lightly defining the shape of the core shadow and then crosshatching using the shape as a guide. As I darken and refine the shadows, you can see me slightly change the direction of the hatch marks with each new pass. As the layering of hatch marks continues, we become less conscious of individual lines and more aware of the illusion of value and form that they create. After adding the center light and the highlight with a white pencil, the illusion of a sphere lit by a single light source becomes even stronger. Next, you'll see me go through the exact same steps while drawing and shading a cylinder using crosshatching. The only difference is that you'll notice that the direction of the hatch marks is derived from the ellipses at either end of the cylinder. I'm essentially using hatch marks as cross-contour lines. This can be a great way to accentuate the roundness of a volume. You can see me use the same technique to add the center light with a white pencil. And finally, I'll use hatch marks to lighten the flat plane at the front of the cylinder. These two crosshatching techniques are the most common you're likely to see. But as with everything else in drawing, there are no hard rules. I would encourage you to explore and experiment with crosshatching to see what works for you. Now, I'll show you a figure drawing of mine where I've used crosshatching in a variety of ways. The first thing I'd like you to notice about this drawing is the angle that the majority of the hatching marks are going. During the hatching practice demonstration, you'll remember that my hatch marks moved down and to the left. This was the most natural and most comfortable way for me to draw hatch marks. This is why the majority of the hatch marks in this drawing are approximately at that angle. Remember, your angle will likely be different from mine, particularly if you're left-handed. There's no right angle with which to hatch. The next thing I'd like you to notice is that the individual hatch marks appear to have been drawn very quickly. Again, there is no right speed at which to hatch, but a viewer can usually tell the difference between a line that was drawn quickly and a line that was drawn slowly. I prefer to draw quickly because of the sense of dynamism and energy that it brings to a drawing. Next, I'd like to introduce the idea of resolution in a drawing. By resolution, I'm referring to the level of focus and detail of any part of a drawing. For example, take a look at the arm at the top of the page with the elbow pointing up. Each individual hatch mark is crisp and clear, and I've rendered the skeletal and muscular features of the arm at a high level of detail. This high-resolution form of drawing brings the arm into sharp focus. Now, let's compare the quality of hatching that I've used to draw this arm with the hatch marks on the other arm. On this arm, we find that the hatch marks are drawn lighter and softer. There are also fewer of them. This lower resolution form of drawing allows this arm to drop into the background, while the higher contrast and higher resolution drawing of the other arm allows it to come toward us. The last thing I'd like to address in this drawing is that even though every individual hatch mark is visible to the viewer, it's critical that they appear to be unified with the hatch marks around them. If a group of hatch marks are unevenly spaced, or if they're not all going the same direction, the hatching pattern becomes broken, and with it, the illusion of value. This is why it's important to practice hatching before applying it to drawings. Now, let's take a look at how to combine cross-hatching with tonal shading. This is another figure drawing of mine. The human figure is a highly complex organic form, but just like any other drawing subject, the figure can be understood through basic volumes and shaded using the same techniques you've learned in this course. There's not a single light or shadow condition in this drawing that you haven't already learned about. But in this drawing, I've tried to use the principles of light logic in some expressive and dynamic ways. Take a look at the shadowed side of the line of termination. You can see evidence of traditional hatch marks, but these hatch marks have been softened with a wash of value made with the side of the pencil. Now take a look at the lit side of the line of termination. You can see that many of the midtones follow the contours of the body, acting essentially as cross-contour lines. And in the lower legs, you can see very soft and light hatch marks that allow the legs to fade out of focus. And finally, I actually like to draw with my hand resting on the paper. Although it does smear the pigment, I like the evidence that it leaves behind of my hand whipping around the page as I draw, constantly reminding the viewer of the artist's hand. This final demonstration is designed to prove to you one simple thing. As long as you establish a clear pattern of light and shadow in your drawings, you can draw using almost any kind of mark making imaginable. In this drawing, I'm making a tangle of lines without so much as a discernible contour. And yet, because these scribbles adhere to the laws of light logic, our minds have little trouble assembling these scribbles into a lit sphere. Once you've got a handle on rendering light and shadow, I would encourage you to experiment, explore, push your mark making into unknown territory. There, you will discover the marks that truly represent you as an artist.